This is a reading from the Autobiography of Maria Valtorta, picking up from where Maria Valtorta's love interest leaves because of her mother's indiscretion. I have suffered greatly. It was here that I had a dream which I feel was surely sent by God for my good. Last night I stopped at this point because I was too unwell to continue, and in the long painful hours of the night the thought came to me that I was omitting a detail capable of explaining my distressing state of mind, described above. I shall now make up for the oversight due to the continuous interruptions I must endure from family members, visitors, and my suffering interruptions which sorely try my patience. 6 months after the Italo-Austrian War had broken out, I was told that Roberto, my very respectful lover, had died in combat. Death put an end there was no escaping to my dream of love, which hope and constancy had continuously nourished. I suffered unspeakably, and thought one could not suffer more. Years later I understood that one could suffer even more, because there are tragic resolutions in the nothingness of human affections even more painful to endure than the ones provoked by death. But I was not familiar with them then, and thus suffered profoundly, saying to myself, it is not possible to suffer more than this. I felt my life breaking, and in truth it broke forever. Afterwards, since I was so young, 18 years old, when thus stricken in the following years, I tried to revive, but my attempts were in vain. My broken wings could no longer keep me aloft in the sky of joy and human love. Only when I had turned my gaze and desire for flight towards the supernatural regions were my poor broken wings able to find the strength to move, because they were assisted by those of the soul, because the atmosphere in which they moved was purer and lighter, in itself an aid to flight, and above all because the hand of the eternal physician had made up for their deficiencies by caressing them. Everything in the world faded for me, taking on a gloomy, grayish tone. I was never again to know love in its meaning of happiness. I later experienced an affection, perhaps. Indeed, there is no doubt about it. Deeper than my first love, an affection which still lasts after so many years, and will endure in me until my final hour. But it was more a friendly, fraternal, and maternal affection than an amorous one. The effervescence of love, the pleasure of love, in a human sense, had ended forever for me. Afterwards, I was a soul that loved a man, and this probably contributed to sending him away from me, for a man wants a woman, flesh, more than a soul. But with the flesh I could no longer love. My youthful flesh died together with Roberto when I was 18. Here's Maria Valtorta at age 18. You will perhaps be amazed that on the basis of the minimum contact I had with him, glances, greetings, and very, very few words, I had been able to make such a vigorous love grow. In solitary lands where a bit of humus has accumulated over the centuries among the stones and crags of rocky coasts or along cliffs overhanging the sea, the agave sometimes appears, with a 7-armed flower like the sacred candelabrum in the Temple of Solomon. And the more solitary it is, and the more its growth is opposed by the poorness of the soil available and inclement weather, the more vigorously it grows. The robust, I would say metallic, tuft of its leaves opening around the column of the flower straightens its fleshy, thorny gray-green lances. The flower's candelabrum splendidly rises towards the sky with its 7 arms, at whose apex, in place of the darting flame, there are yellow-red corollas of the lovely, sweet-scented flower, which does not bend and die in the face of parching thirst in the sun, the whipping of winds, the cuffs of the waves, or the pelting of hail. Not even man, with his instruments of death, can uproot it from the clod where it had made its nest to grow and flourish. Only the lightning bolt can reduce it to ashes and destroy its tenacious vitality. My love was like the solitary agave, born to introduce the joy of a blooming where there was nothing but tears and loneliness. It had deeply taken root in me, and had become my reason for existence. The opposition hurled against it had served only to force it to sink its roots in ever more profoundly, and push its stem, protecting in its flourishing by the bulwark of robust leaves, ever higher. Everything had been a pro nobis for its birth. Pro nubus for its birth. Such sad family conditions, with a disabled father and a despotic mother, no brothers or sisters, deprived of the holy affections of my boarding school, for which I felt such acute nostalgia, my temperament desirous of love more than bread, clothing, and diversions, my reflecting that to get out of the hostile, oppressive atmosphere at home, such as my home was, and my looking towards the future and meditating on the fact that on the death of my loved ones I would be left alone in the world, spurred me to love more than man in himself. Roberto had everything to be loved: goodness, handsomeness, wealth, culture, but I think that if he had not been handsome and wealthy and had possessed only goodness and culture, I would have loved him just the same. To me, love was a binding condition to be able to live. If from that point on I had known what would have been of service to my peace, I would have directed my need to love elsewhere and would not have been disappointed. But the good Lord wanted me to love him by experience, shall we say, to love him not by a grace granted gratuitously by him, but through my own conviction, my own spontaneous will. I had to go to him after having seen how short-lived human affections were, after having tasted what bitterness was hidden under the fictitious sweetness of human joys. I had to seek repose in him, after having become convinced that in any other place where I might rest my flight, I would find prickly thorns beneath false roses, after having observed that, instead of the sought-for company, there was a distressing void everywhere, and that only he alone could give me faithfulness, sweetness, repose, warmth, company, and comfort. According to human logic, this would appear to be cruelty. However, now that I live on the supernatural planes, I judge it to be proof of the esteem God has granted me and an utterly special predilection. In the school of experience, he has instructed me in the knowledge of good and evil. He has shown me, causing me to see with my own eyes, the difference between life's ephemeral joys and the eternal joys of the Spirit. At this moment, I do not recall whose lips were purified of all human savors by a seraph with fire brought from heaven, so that he might perfectly understand the food of God's word and celebrate his splendors. Footnote: Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 7. But I find that God, substituting himself for the seraph, also purified both my heart and my lips with the fire of pain, to make them capable of tasting non-earthly things. And I bless you, O Father, for the heat of the burn, for the potency of your cauterization, for your operating upon me in the capacity of a physician who, to give life, destroys the parts invaded by destructive maladies. I bless you for your love, which has saved me against my own will, for your patience, for your patience, which has waited for me, and for your indestructible compassion, which no disavowal or fault by us breaks, and which had such great mercy on me. I bless you for having evangelized me again, for having transfigured me in you as soon as I said, I want to be yours. A life on my knees with my arms upraised in a gesture of love and blessing. My whole life does not suffice to thank you for all you have given me, and all my pain which I have asked you for, and give to you, for in my weakness and wretchedness I cannot give you anything but my suffering, is a small offering, a quite insignificant tribute, an even more insignificant repayment in the light of all you have given to me. O Lord, O good Master, unwearying compassion, for this nothingness of mine which I give you, and which is all I possess, that is really my own, and is not surplus. For I do not give you things left over, but the essential things to live on earth, the ones everybody seeks to conserve as the greatest treasure, because it is my health, my life, my sacrifice, my suffering. But for all this, Holy Trinity, for all this, my Jesus, you grant to others, to numberless other guilty as I once was, what you have given to me, to take them with you to heaven through conversion and love. Let us now return to my story. I was saying then that it was precisely at that time, while I struggled in the blackest darkness and felt surrounded by 1,000 temptations, hissing like ferocious vipers, when God sent me a dream. I know quite well that one should not believe in dreams as do superstitious women, but I also know that always to disbelieve dreams is not advisable. It all depends on how one believes. One thing is to give oneself over to dismay, because, just to give you an example, one has dreamed of a cat, certain betrayal, a white grape, a sure sign of tears, and so on, according to the teaching of the Kabbalah and superstition, and quite another is to accept a dream for what it is, a supernatural warning. In sleep, which dulls our matter, the soul, eternally sleepless, is free and undistracted, utterly alert to receive the voices descending from other worlds unknown to us. Sacred history in both the Old and New Testaments is filled with dreams which were voices from the Eternal One for his children wandering over the earth. Christian hagiography is equally full of these dreams. I shall term them guiding dreams, to lead the predestined along the way chosen by the Creator for a given creature. Many say, I've never experienced anything of the kind. Perhaps, but it is more likely that it is their psychic dullness, their lack of reflection, which blunts them to the point of not grasping the admonitions coming to us from the reins of mystery. But I have had, and a number of such dreams, which are premonitions or norms for life. I am not saying that they were there, ready to come down into my sleep, just as easily as soup is poured into a tureen. No, for goodness sake, I dreamt a lot, but among the 1,000 dreams which were merely wanderings of the mind, and brought me back lovely landscapes, seashores, past moments, and so forth, there were the dreams, with a capital D. When I would awake, something inexpressible would warn me to pay attention to that dream. It was as though a light hand were touching me, and a voice were whispering in my ear, "Take care, reflect and remember." That time, it was this way. It was in the late spring of 1916, if, after so many years, I remember the date correctly, to be precise, the night between the 17th and 18th of June. I was in a tremendous period of despair and desire. I think that out of all the pious practices, only communion on the first Friday of the month survived. My soul was embittered and rebellious. Imagine whether I could have God in mind. No, there was certainly no preparation on my part for that dream. I was, rather, on the opposite shore and farther from God. In the dream, I saw myself in beautiful countryside, green fields where a tepid light wind straightened the green stems of the minute blades of grass and made the variegated little flowers kiss each other. Here and there a tuft of trees resembled giants in conversation. A light blue river with low banks and placid waters split that lovely countryside in two. Hills faded away in the distance. I am still sure, as I was then, that in many trips up and down Italy, I had never seen that place. I was walking over the emerald grass and bending to pick flowers. All of a sudden, I saw a young man at my side, very handsome, tall, dark, with curly hair, the blackest eyes, brilliant as stars, and a tumid, smiling mouth. He was wearing a long tunic reaching the ground. He looked to me like an Oriental, somewhere between a Bedouin and an ancient Roman. He came closer and closer, courteously showing interest in what I was doing, and he also set about picking flowers for me, the prettiest I had ever seen, for as soon as he touched something, it became very beautiful. I liked talking to him and having him near. He was so handsome and courteous. He really allured me, and I congratulated myself on having met him. But in the background, nearly on the horizon, beyond the river, 3 personages appeared. They were also dressed in long, free-flowing robes and mantles. They approached us, walking nimbly but with great majesty. I watched them as if bewitched, for something mysterious issued from them and continually grew as they drew near. The handsome youth at my side said, "Don't look, come away," and he placed a hand on my shoulder to impose his will on me more and more. I raised my head to look at him and answer, for he was much taller than I, and remained astonished at the change in his features. An expression that was a mixture of fear and wrath had spread over his face, and was making it ugly. I was almost frightened of him, and trying to free myself from his clasp, replied, "Let me see, then I'll come away." But the youth, increasingly restless, continued to repeat, "Come away, come away. Those 3 are enemies and want to harm you." I said, "It's not possible. Their faces are too good." I could now make out the features of the 3 faces. One was an elderly man with a rough, rather common face, and a beard more grey than black, covering his cheeks and chin, leaving only his vigorous cheekbones exposed, furrowed by just a few wrinkles. His hair was cut rather short, but not as men's is now. It was halfway between long hair and the current style of clipping. His eyes, quite alive and severe, continually moved from me to his companion in the middle, with whom he was speaking animatedly. The other was a young man of about 25 at most. Whereas the former wore a grey robe and a dark tobacco-colored mantle, the latter was dressed in red with a darker red mantle. He was rather tall, slender, but not excessively so, with a very handsome face, devoid of mustache and beard, with fresh, rosy skin, very tender, light blue eyes, and pale, blonde, slightly wavy, neck-length hair. He was also speaking to the one in the middle, but quite calmly, and looking at me with great compassion. The one in the center, who attracted me more than the others, was very tall, so that his head and neck stood out above the other two. He was wearing a white mantle, and underneath a soft red robe that was nearly pink. A great majesty issued forth from him. From his gait, his gestures, his way of dressing, his two companions, and his glances, which possessed a superhuman gentleness, his face was very pale, without being wan, with dark blue eyes, a very handsome forehead, broad and smooth, a long chin over a long, thin oval which the reddish blonde beard, shading only his chin, rendered even longer. He had shoulder-length hair falling down from the top of his head, divided to the right and to the left by the part, in soft locks, more red than blonde, called Titian blonde by painters, which ended in slight cannoli. He had long, white, very beautiful hands. His body was slim, tending towards leanness. His glance was a poem of goodness, a bit sad, though tinged with a smile, a glance which implored, "Love me." I gazed with increasing fascination and felt attracted towards him. My companion took me by both hands to drag me away. He was furious, now ugly, with a fierce, sullen, contorted face. I saw him grow uglier and uglier by the minute. He was trembling and grinding his teeth. But I resisted him. I was now fighting against him, scratching and biting him. While struggling like that, I realized that the three had crossed the bridgeless stream, I don't know how, and were now very close. I comprehended who they were: Jesus, St. Peter, and St. John the Apostle. With a final effort, I wriggled away from my companion, who now appeared as my enemy, and ran to throw myself at the feet of Jesus. "Lord, save me!" I cried, grasping the hem of his robe. The enemy, I could write the enemy, for I now understood clearly who he was. His face had become a real demon's face. Ran up to me again, so fierce that he overcame the disgust which the sight of Jesus caused him, and brutally seized me by the shoulder. I felt his hand, which had turned into a claw, sticking into my flesh. Weeping, I repeated, "Lord, save me." Jesus was silent. He looked at me and remained silent. A great mercy was in his gaze, but his lips were closed, and his hands hung inertly alongside the white robe. St. Peter was far from being benign, and was saying to Jesus that I did not deserve mercy. St. John, however, with a sorrowful voice and a dejected gaze, was pleading my cause. "Master, have mercy on this poor creature. Free her, you that can. At heart she has always respected you and once loved you. Now she is overwhelmed by a deceit. Help her, Master." The enemy was shrieking, "No, she is mine. I won't let her go. I have taken her, and I'll keep her." And Jesus was silent. Then I raised my head and arms and grasped his hands, covering them with kisses, and said, "O Lord, Lord, how can you fail to help me? In the end, I have loved you. Don't you remember any more? I have not done real evil. Why then won't you free me from him who wants to drag me away?" Then Jesus spoke, and who could ever forget that voice? And who could make me hear that tone again, that cadence still vibrating with precision within me, which I think will resound until the blessed moment when I hear it again in heaven? Then Jesus spoke and said, "Maria, know that it is not enough not to do evil. It is also necessary not to wish to do it." While Peter pushed me back, tearing me away from Jesus, and John caressed me, supplicating in my favor, and the enemy with curses and horrendous scornful laughs held my right shoulder more tightly in his claw, I heard Jesus repeat those words twice more. And then his hand rested on my head in a gesture of absolution and benediction. I still feel the delicate touch of those long fingers in my hair. I understood that I had been forgiven and redeemed, and in a surge of gratitude hurled myself against his chest, weeping tears of thanksgiving, repentance, and joy, a cleansing which completely purified me, while the enemy fled with a desperate howl, and I was embraced by Jesus. I awoke with my soul illuminated by something unearthly. 26 years and 9 months have passed since that night, but that dream is still in me, as alive as when I awoke. I see it with precision, in all the slightest details, and if I were a painter, I could depict those faces and instants in the dream. I have not altered a word or introduced embellishments and contrivances. I have faithfully narrated what I have dreamt. In all the art and religious article shops, I have looked for a face of Jesus like the one I saw, but I have never found one. On one there was the oval, but not the gaze. On another the gaze, but not the mouth. On still another the mouth, but not the cheeks. I am convinced that a human hand cannot recreate that face. I have often dreamed of Jesus after that occasion, and he always had that face, that stature, and those hands. For some time I have had more than a dream, and I always see Jesus with that face, that stature, those hands. When you gave me that book, Father, on the Holy Shroud, it shook me, for though it was altered by the sufferings undergone, I saw that face. Along with that stature, and those hands, the worst part of my temptation was over. I'm not saying that I no longer experienced black hours of rebellion. No, I still had many. But when the demon of rebellion, sense, and despair assaulted me to give me deadly thoughts, Jesus' words made me able to repel the desire to do evil. This morning, March 23rd, you brought me Holy Communion. And of all the things on earth and in heaven, it is the one I most desire. And at the same time, you brought me a letter. I shall open a parenthesis in my story to respond to that letter. In my utter indigence as regards physical strength, I must calculate even the small change, the pennies I have left, and administer them with notable economy. I shall thus answer you right here, so as not to have to write here in my reply in a letter apart. I believe I have already told you orally and in writing what I judge to be true forgiveness. The conditions I regard as essential in order for forgiveness to be real forgiveness and not an unsuccessful imitation, stained by a bit of hypocrisy, and of the worst kind, for it seeks to deceive us. I don't say God, because God is not deceived, but ourselves, presenting us to ourselves as creatures of mercy, religion, wretched arts seducing only our human pride, which the voice of conscience accuses as deceitful. To me, one forgives precisely when one feels that a given deed, which one day seemed an offense, no longer hurts. When an organ in our human machine does not hurt or stops hurting, we forget about it. One who is healthy does not even realize he has lungs, a heart, kidneys, a liver, a brain, and so on. But if one of these blessed organs, which makes us so perfect and so complicated, grows ill, and thus starts to hurt, oh, how we become aware of it, and its exact location. The same applies to an offense received, or any other injury our fellow man causes us. We can say we have really forgiven it when it no longer hurts like a burn or a knife cut. Then indifference takes over, which, as it is the end of love, is also the end of rancor. And then, without thinking any more, one forgives completely. But it is a forgiveness of relative merit. Now, I may have reached indifference by myself, insensitivity to a given pain which was an offense to me. This perhaps depends on the fact that other, greater pains have succeeded that one and distracted me from it, or maybe it depends on the fact that a greater, more select love has compensated for all the human meanness with superhuman gifts. I don't know. I do know that by myself I have reached insensitivity to former wounds, but I cannot, will not, am unable to reach insensitivity to the sorrows my father suffered. I judge no one. I remember and meditate, and that's all. I recall and recount, for this pile of black tesseras is also necessary to compose the mosaic of my life, and that's all. I do not judge, or if I judge, I judge with mercy, for it is painful to see that a being prefers to cause suffering instead of giving comfort and love, to see that a being who could and should be good is not. We cannot become rich, attractive, and intelligent just by willing it. Wealth depends on many other circumstances, which combine with our work to give us earnings. And then, with good looks and intelligence, there's nothing to be done. If one is born deformed or an imbecile, nothing can make one an Apollo or a genius. But he can become good if he wants to. A little each day, a bit each hour, we can manage to improve our moral tendencies. I do not judge, or if I judge, I do so with mercy. I am not blind, and I am not simple-minded. I thus see and evaluate the actions of others. But whether I am now so philosophical, or rather so Christian that I am not thrown into confusion by certain events, I see them and say to myself, they are fruits of our human tree, corrupted at its roots by the sin of our first parents. And with my divine Master, I repeat over anyone causing suffering and acting badly the prayer of mercy, which in the final hours moved the most holy and parched lips of my Jesus. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Yes, for I am convinced that whoever acts badly, causing his fellows pain, and worst of all, grieving God, is one who does not know what he is doing. A sort of moron in goodness. Now, even human law does not condemn the deficient, those not responsible, and the mad. At most, it confines them in special institutions. If one possessed perfect mental balance, he would not degrade himself by certain acts of useless wickedness which do not give him joy and lower him in the esteem of everyone and himself. Don't you think as I do, Father? Yes, you won't say so, but you also feel certain tendencies of moral sadism are the fruit of psychic alteration. I thus do not condemn them, but I remember them. And if it is inevitable that the good should suffer on account of those less good, as my father suffered, woe to whoever causes suffering for no reason. Beginning on this earth, he has his punishment, which, if not expressed in another, even more burdensome. Beginning on this earth, he has his punishment, which, if not expressed in another, even more burdensome form, is represented by an inner discontent, giving no peace. As far as I'm concerned, Father, you can rest assured in all honesty. I hate no one, and much less the woman who was the source of weeping for Father and myself. My whole life bears witness to what I am saying. Along with Jesus, I, too, can exclaim, and who among you can convict me of sin? Faithful to my purpose, always faithful even in the most agitated moments of my existence, I have always practiced towards my mother, my father, my relatives, friends, acquaintances, and strangers, sacrifice and duty, at all times and in every circumstance of my life. I knew that, as regarded my mother, that did not change anything, but an idealist, like all poets, I have ever hoped to infuse love into her by sending forth waves of love to surround her. When offended, I did not offend. When sacrificed, I did not sacrifice. When neglected, I did not neglect. I have served her more than a faithful slave would, so much that I have spoiled her to the point that no one else can satisfy her any longer. I should say so. And where can she find patience equal to mine, assistance equal to mine, and renunciation equal to mine? I must acknowledge and proclaim it in order not to fail in truth and charity towards my own soul, which has respected the fourth commandment, as do very few souls of other sons and daughters. I cannot tell you everything, Father, but I tell you that even my freedom in the hours of the night, in the secrecy of my room, where I could pray without attracting derision, meditate without being disturbed, weep and suffer, was sacrificed by me to help her more, though I was really sick, in her ailments, which were quite mild. Beginning in 1924, I slept with her and continued to do so until August the 1st, 1934, 10 years. Afterwards, reduced to my current state, I found myself abandoned by my mother, who preferred to move to another room to sleep, entrusting me to others. Don't you think that made me suffer? In a poem I wrote on the night of March 19th, 1935, a night of agony, I can assure you I spoke of my night as a sick person. A flame tremulously keeps watch with me, reasons with me, flickers words. With longing I recall mother's kisses. Why is she not near me as always, anxious as a flame, consoling as the sun? The dawn comes shyly to rap at the windows. a white light, all purity. Dark dreams disappear at its coming. The dawn rapping at the windows, adorned with freshness, brings me my mother's caress. And so I continued. It is not a poetic masterpiece, but a cry from the soul, written for me alone, and thus as sincere as a confession. Certain things are not written unless they are felt. With all the love I had and have for my father, I have not found a rhyme for him, but hunger for my mother's love, my insatiate hunger, shook my heart, causing poetry to gush forth from it, whereby the maximum feeling, which the most beautiful prose cannot convey with the fullness desired, explodes. Sick as I was, and only God and the doctors were in a position to evaluate what going upstairs and downstairs meant for me, I went up and down the stairs dozens of times a day to serve Mother, who was healthy, and spare her the obligation to do so to satisfy certain human needs. This concerns the material part. Besides, morally, did I not grieve, and do I not grieve over seeing her so impossible to content, so authoritarian, to the point that she is avoided by all? And why do I grieve? Because I think that at my death she will be left alone, old and alone. I now act as a cohesive cement, and keep many people joined to her. But when I am gone, they will all withdraw. Don't you think this is a torment for me? But it is the only thing that makes me look to the end. I won't say with fear, but with anxiety, for her sake, not for mine. As for the spiritual part, you should know, Father, that I have always prayed for my father and my mother, that God might help them in all their needs, all of them, material, financial, moral, and spiritual. In my act of self-offering as a victim to God, among the different intentions for which I ask to be consumed is this one, that from my sacrifice every possible good on this earth and beyond might come to my parents. And since my good sense told me that of the two, the one with the greater need for heavenly aid was my mother, I naturally prayed for her more for her than for that just man who was my father. You tell me that bad treatment received sometimes makes an invincible aversion to the one who is our oppressor arise in the victim, just as happens in the sheep with an invincible aversion to the wolf, that by instinct is led to tear sheep to pieces. That's true, but only partly. As far as I'm concerned, it must be that I'm more idiotic than many others. I trembled and tremble still before my mother, and always live in the fear that she will cause me some other harm. But I have never felt aversion to her, to the extent that, in spite of having had many opportunities to leave my home, and being asked insistently by many, relatives and others, to go and live with them so as to offer them my uncommon activity and intelligence, I have always refused, though feeling that I was damaging my own tranquility and self-interest, in order not to leave her alone with Father, who was no longer capable of anything. I believe all of this demonstrates that, while remembering all the suffering my mother has unjustly occasioned me, I harbor no hatred, resentment, aversion, or even indifference towards her, but possess a great love, for only a great, perfect love is able to go on loving without receiving any love in return.